Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Mary and I am a professional freelance illustrator and a gouache watercolor artist. For this video I'm going to be painting a picture of a Halszkaraptor, which has received a lot of scientific excitement lately. It's a newly described species and I decided that I was going to do a little painting monochromatically, so I'm going to be using only Cascade Green by Smith, which is a multi-pigment watercolor. So it's made of a phthalo and a sienna, so you're going to see when it dries it sort of splits into its separate different pigments, and I think it makes a really beautiful effect for a monochromatic painting like this one. So while that time lapse is going on, I'm just going to chat to you a little bit about learning, basically. I wanted to introduce a little bit of my education background and how I believe that learning and reference go hand in hand. And I'll explain some of the reference practices that I use in my work, both professionally and just for studies and stuff like that. So to start off, I thought I might as well mention that I did attend art school and I did finish my degree. I did a Bachelor's of Design at the Alberta College of Art and Design here in Canada with a major in illustration. So I decided to go to this school because I wanted to pursue concept art, and I would still love to do that in the future. Right now I'm just freelancing, which I really enjoy. And I ended up majoring in illustration and mostly doing all of my assignments and all of my learning painting with gouache and watercolor. And I was able to learn a great deal from the teachers at my college because they were all industry professionals. I think that's the important part of going to an art school, is you meet people who have professional experience and can explain to you client practices, how to interact with clients and really how best to go about a career in art. And I knew that I wanted to do art professionally, so for me, going to art college and doing my degree was invaluable and I learned a ton. While I was there, several of my instructors were actually illustrators who worked in natural illustration, so animals and landscapes and stuff like that. They've done work for magazines and for national parks, which I admired greatly, and they were super helpful to me in my journey to becoming sort of a science and animal artist or a creature designer. Some people have asked me before what I thought art school was useful for, and even if you go to art school, a lot of it is still going to be self-directed, and a lot of your personal growth is still going to come just from your own initiative and your own attention to improving your practice and your skills. But I think the connections that you make both with your teachers and with your classmates can be really important, and it's great to have that sort of camaraderie and commiseration going through your artistic journey. Reference to me is very important. I know that some places on the internet, and I was part of this, I was in sort of the DeviantArt zone where reference was kind of taboo, like you should be able to draw all this stuff yourself without looking at reference, and reference is stealing and stuff like that, which it's not. If you do it responsibly, it's totally not. Now, reference doesn't necessarily have to be just photo reference. You can use photo reference, collecting different bits and pieces just from Google or from stock photo websites. You can license reference, and then if you want to do a painting that is really directly influenced by the image, so for example, you find a photograph of a person with a really interesting face and you want to do a really tight study of that and maybe sell it in a gallery or sell it online, then you want to license the reference, make sure that you're paying the photographer, make sure you know that you have the correct permissions to use that image. You can do that through like Adobe Stock and stuff like that. There's tons of stock photo websites out there. Reference, you can also photograph yourself, and then you own all the rights to the images and you can use them for whatever purposes you need. I highly recommend taking your own reference whenever you can. Dress up yourself, dress up your friends. It gives you more control over the poses that you need for your image, and everybody's been doing that since basically the dawn of time. You know, cave artists were looking at actual animals to draw them, and all the Renaissance painters were hiring models to pose for them, and the advent of photography, of cameras, only made it easier. People have been taking photographs, especially I love the reference photos of the Hildebrandt brothers. They've done tons of Lord of the Rings illustrations, and all the reference photos are great because it's them like posing in sheets with like crazy hand gestures. It's awesome. So you can take your own reference, and then you don't have to worry about infringing on any rights or anything because it's yours. Pretty straightforward. But reference can also be just observing stuff with your eyes. So going outside and drawing from life, drawing animals and trees from life, but it can also be 3D reference. So especially for paleo art, I use a lot of little models because then I can rotate it in 3D space and easily see the strange angles that are maybe harder to imagine in your head and get to look right because somebody has already made a toy of it. You just have to be careful, you know, that the science of the toy matches the science of the drawing you're doing. A lot of the old ceratopsian toys have really bad feet and stuff like that. So it's important to do your research, but having these guys around is really handy. And I have a ton of toys. You can see on my desk, it's like covered in toys and figures, but I find them really useful for my illustrations. Basically, if you're referencing from a ton of different sources, learning different elements like lighting from one photo or anatomy for another photo, or just looking at one for a pose, but you're not copying it directly, if you're pulling all these little threads together to make your own original thing, then there's really nothing to worry about, and the reference is going to help inform your image and make it basically a better image that better withstands the test of time. One thing that I find, especially for my professional work, is that you want to make sure things are correct. You want your work to be about your ideas and your talent and your skill. You don't want it to be about, oh, the arm on that person looks really weird. You know, reference helps you avoid making those mistakes that will detract from the viewer's experience of your artwork. You're basically like covering your bases and proactively making sure that your image is going to look solid well into the future. So if you have good reference and you do your research and you do your anatomy studies and you do your life drawing, your work is just going to stand up better to your artistic growth, because if your growth is impeded by your knowledge of the human form or how cows look, you know, something like that. Like if you draw a cow and it looks nothing like a cow, as soon as you find out what a cow looks like, you're going to hate that painting that you did. Does that make sense? So that's sort of how I view reference. It's sort of like an insurance policy. And I always keep all my reference in folders, or sometimes I print them out, because that way I have a documentation of my process for creating the image, which just basically you keep it around, and this is for, you know, professional purposes. You keep it around just in case you have to prove that you did the image. So if you keep all your sketches and you keep all your reference and you keep everything in a little folder, or, you know, you print it out and staple it together, then you have proof that you're the one that made that. So if anyone infringes on your copyright, or you are accused of infringing on somebody else's, you have the evidence to back up that no, you didn't. And you're just, it's good professional practice to hold on to that stuff. Another thing with references, I think, is knowing when your reference is wrong, because it sometimes happens, especially if you're looking, say, at old medical illustrations or like other paleontological illustrations. So if you're looking at stuff that other people have drawn, which sometimes you have to, especially with paleo art, like a lot of it is people have drawn the fossils or drawn their own reconstructions of the animals, and you have to sort of suss out what they did correctly and what you can improve on. And so knowing your anatomy and knowing the origin and insertion points of muscles and stuff like that, knowing how bones work, is going to help you be able to improve upon your reference. Because one of the jobs you have as an illustrator is to do a better job than a photographer, or, you know, bring your own skills and opinions to the table and make the best work possible. So for example, this drawing of a Halszkaraptor, a lot of the skeletal reconstructions out there, I thought that the insertion point of the cervical vertebrae into the base of the skull looked really weird. Not even any birds are like that. Dinosaurs aren't usually like that. If you look at the skull, you can see the insertion point and it would be maybe at a different angle. So I didn't follow the reference completely to a T because I knew that another human being had made that, and I'm sure a lot of scientists said, yep, this is good, yeah, this is good, but for me to make an animal that to me felt semi-real and believable, changing that angle was important. So that's just an example of where I improved upon the reference for my own purposes. You don't have to take the reference as law, basically, especially with photographs, because lenses really distort the image, especially photographs, because perspective looks fine with a photograph because your brain sort of says, oh, I understand this is a photograph, this is a real thing, I get it, I get what's going on here. But you can get some really extreme foreshortening in photos, or also really weird, wide angle distortion and fisheyeing and stuff like that, which looks fine in a photo because you can understand what's going on. You have to be able to know when the camera is interfering with your reference and what you see, and then make it better for an illustration. You always want to look at the reference, but also know what you can do to make the silhouette better, to make it make more sense as a drawing, to make the contrasts much better. This is sort of where illustration becomes really powerful to me, and I really like this part of illustration. I got hired to do a job that was basically painting portraits of specific trees in Canada, and I did that for Canadian Geographic, and it was a really great job. But doing all the reference searches, you find a picture of the tree, but also there's all the trees behind it. And if you did a photograph of that, it's basically just going to look like a photograph of a forest, and maybe you're not sure what tree you're looking at, and maybe you're not sure where the tree ends, and because the tree is so tall, the perspective is like super weird. So as an illustrator, I was able to look at these references, know which tree in particular, which individual organism I had to draw, and then I can also take that really bizarre perspective and straighten it out, So because I'm painting it, then it can be on a white background, and then there's no confusion as to which tree we're talking about and which tree the viewer and the reader is supposed to be appreciating. So that was just a really fun job. I love painting trees. I've included some trees in this picture of Halszkaraptor, and I hope you enjoyed this little chat, and I hope you enjoyed the painting. And I'm going to leave you with some high-resolution scans of how that Cascade Green watercolor paint separates and dries so nicely into the phthalo and the sienna. I just think it looks really gorgeous. And if you like what you saw today, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!